Here we have, again, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, big themes, creation, the fall of man, the flood, the Tower of Babel, all these things. And then chapter 12, it starts to narrow down. We're moving from the big themes. Now we're moving to a single man and his family, Abraham. And then today we're going to see that is, in the death of Abraham, it is now continuing on through Isaac. Even though Ishmael was born first, and Ishmael was blessed by God and had lots and lots and lots and lots of children, lots of nations came from Ishmael, we're going to be focusing in on Isaac as the Abrahamic covenant starts to play out. So chapter 23, verse 1, we have this wonderful start of this memorial service. Sarah, another wonderful woman who believed in God, and she's mentioned in a number of other places, Isaiah 51, Hebrews chapter 11. Her faith is in the hall of fame there in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11. She's also mentioned in 1 Peter 3 as a godly woman who was not only beautiful. Every narrative in the Old Testament talks about her beauty physically, but she was beautiful inside, and where true beauty resides. So we have her age. Verse 2, and Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is, later was called Hebron, and in the land of Canaan. And Abraham, it's interesting here, my New American Standard says Abraham went in to mourn for her. The King James is actually more accurate in this particular case, and the King James says he came to that area to mourn for her. And we're not exactly sure, but there was some separation at the time of Sarah's death from Abraham. It's not like they were divorced or anything like that, but he was off somewhere, and we don't know why, so there's no need to really speculate. But he gets word that his dearly beloved Sarah has passed, and so in verse 2, he comes to that place. And we've already been talking about how the entire land of Canaan, in fact, even larger portions of that Middle East, are promised to Abraham and his descendants. And yet we find him there living for over a half a century. And even after all that time and all of God's promises, when his dearly beloved Sarah passes away, he doesn't even own a burial plot in his own land promised to him by God. He has to come and negotiate and make some arrangements. And verses 4 through 20, I won't take the time to read the whole thing, but Abraham purchases, you can see it in verse 9, the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his fields. He's negotiating with the owner. And one of the interesting things here in the book of Genesis that should strengthen our faith in God's word for years and years, I mean like hundreds of years, people denied the existence of the Hittites. They just said, well, there's just no historical evidence, there's no archaeological evidence, they never existed, so this Pentateuch written by Moses is just kind of some stories strung together. But we now know that the Hittites were a very prominent culture in the second millennium BC, which fits exactly with Abraham's time. And this negotiation process, verses 4 to 20, is exactly how the Hittite code handled the transfer of property. You see right away, the Hittites say, oh, Abraham, you could have anything in our whole land, anything to bury your wife. We're just so pleased to help you. Well, that was just their way of initiating the negotiations. Oh, and Abraham responds, oh, no, I couldn't do that. Let me buy it for you. And then it finally comes down to, well, what's 400 shekels between us? Way too much money. That's what it is. They're ripping him off, and they're expecting him to negotiate. And in particular, they honor him as a wonderful man that God is blessing, and he owns this land. By God's dictate, it's his land, but they're going to charge him an exorbitant cost, not just for the cave, but the field around it. And why that's important? The Hittite code said the land transfer and the land produce is a feudal system. So whoever owned the fields had to give some of their money to the top dog. So if he just sold the cave to bury Sarah, the landowner would still be responsible to the top dog for his taxes, as it were. So he doesn't want to just sell the cave. He says, you got to take the field with it, which would have been worth probably 40 shekels. He ends up paying 400 shekels, an exorbitant price. Abraham's willing to pay it. He's wealthy. He wants to just take care of business. In fact, he's going to say here, please allow me this so I can bury my loved one out of my sight. So that's the Sarah's memorial here. Verse 20, so the field and the cave that is in it were deeded over to Abraham for a burial site by the sons of Heth. So the Hittites, the sons of Heth. And God is honoring this dear woman of faith. Was she perfect? No. Is anybody ever perfect? In fact, I put on the other side of your bulletin outline today how some people think it's up to them to tear down statues of imperfect people. There are no perfect people except Jesus. He's the only one that we really should erect a statue to, and he tells us don't do it. Don't make a graven image. So the idea of people tearing down these statues because the people being honored, which ties again into Memorial Day, by the way, we're not perfect, is really kind of silly. The people tearing them down are not perfect either. And what business do they have passing judgment on these guys and gals who did incredible things over the years by God's help in our nation? So that's a little bit of a rabbit trail. No charge for that. We could probably take that out of the radio message or whatever. The second thing is the servant's mission, chapter 24. Towards the end of chapter 23, and as we're going on here, Abraham has got word that his brother was being blessed just as he was to some degree, children, grandchildren, lots of kids. And now when Sarah passes away in chapter 23, it drives home the idea again. My son of promise, Isaac, is single. We know he's 40 years old at this time. He was 37 when Sarah died. Sarah's tent is vacant for 3 years until Rebekah comes, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Chapter 24, verse 1, now Abraham was old, advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. So chapter 24 starts out with Abraham's 140 years old. And he's, again, hit full force. My God has promised me the seeds. My offspring will be like the sands of the shore and like the stars of the sky. And it's my seed's going to come through Isaac, and he doesn't even have a wife yet. He's 40 years old. Maybe he was living in the basement playing video games. I'm not sure. But it's time to get out there and find a wife. Why is this important? We have chapter 24 here because Abraham feels keenly this son of promise has to have a wife with the same values, and I don't want him to find a wife around us in Canaan. Abraham has lived there for 50 plus years. He knows what these people are like, and he knows I don't want my son to choose a wife from the Canaanites. So he gives his servant, verse 2, he says to his servant, the oldest in his household. Now we don't know for sure, but this is probably Eleazar. He's when Abraham didn't have any children yet, he said to God, as if God didn't know, Eleazar was born in my household. He's the oldest of my household, and when I die, he is my heir. Well, God said, no, that ain't going to work. I'm going to send you a son, Isaac, through Sarah. He'll be your heir. Now, you fast forward 40 years, and here's this Eleazar who would have been the heir. Abraham says, come here. I got a job for you. I want you to go back to my country, and I want you to go back there and select a wife for my son. Long story short here, Eliezer says, okay, I accept the job, but what if she won't come back with me? Should I take Isaac over there? And Abraham says, don't you dare ever take my son out of the promised land. In fact, Isaac is the only patriarch who had one wife and never left Canaan. We find even later that there's a famine in the land, and God tells Isaac, do not go down to Egypt, stay where you are, and I will take care of you. So Isaac is a special case, only fell in love with and married one woman, and he is the son of promise, but I don't want his wife to come from this group. So 500 miles, this old guy. Eliezer, by now, Abraham's 140, Eliezer's 80. A couple of you guys in here will testify, I don't think I would take on a 500-mile trek to go find a woman for somebody else. But that's what Eliezer did. He's a faithful servant. He's God's man. They travel from Haran, later called Haran, up to Perium Aram, where Abraham came, and that's where his relatives are. And so he says, I want you to take some gifts, and he takes 10 camels and a whole bunch of wealth, and he goes looking for a wife. It's incredible the details that he sets up, he being Eliezer. God, I'm on this mission, and if she doesn't come back with me, I'm in trouble. I can't bring Isaac to her. Please guide my steps. And this is what I'm going to kind of focus on for the rest of the message, is a lot of Christians have this notion based on this chapter that God has some special mate selected just for you in the whole world. It's pretty incredible how God guided Eliezer right to this woman. And he even said, Lord, if she's the one, have her say this. And if she's the one, have her water my camels. If she's the one, have her respond in a particular way. And guess what? She did, word for word. In fact, we have the story told twice. When Eliezer gets back, he relates the whole story, word for word, emphasizing how important this was and how unusual. Man, God guided my step right to the exact woman. And unfortunately, there's a lot of Christians today who think that's the way we should pick a spouse. Pray like crazy, put out a fleece, put out some signs, and when we perceive those signs are met, she's the one. Don't want to burst your bubbles. That doesn't happen. For one thing, Isaac really did not have an option. He had to get married. Why? For the Abrahamic covenant to be fulfilled, Isaac could not remain single. So he had to get married. Abraham is concerned, well, he's got to get married so he could have kids and fulfill this Abrahamic covenant, but I don't want him getting a wife from these people, from my neighbors. It's not racial, by the way. I want to underscore, it's not racial. It's values-oriented. And Abraham is not being a bigot here. He's being a concerned dad. I want a good woman who shares the values of my son so they will be happily married forever after. We know as we progress in the next couple chapters, they're quite dysfunctional. So even when God supernaturally guides people together, there's still stress, strain in marriage, so be careful. So we're told he's 40 years old. Isaac, if you scoot along there to chapter 25, verse 20, and we'll come right back, but I just want to give you the reference. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. By the way, they're cousins. But Isaac falls into the same trap that his dad did. He lied. She's so beautiful, I might lose my neck, so I'm going to say she's my sister. So basically, I'm throwing her under the bus to save my skin. And that's exactly what Abraham did with Sarah, not once, but twice. So again, be careful. Even though you're looking for godly values for your daughter-in-law, what you're passing along to your son is critically important too. Are you a liar? Because he'll learn to be a liar. If you honor God, he'll learn to honor God as well. So watch out. He's 40 years old. And then coming back to chapter 24, verse 61. All this stuff going on, the saying the right words and finding the right family and watering the 10 camels and all that stuff. And then verse 61, after Eleazar makes the proposal, will you come with me? The family says, well, give us 10 days. We want to be able to say goodbye properly. Let's not rush into this. We're not too sure. By the way, Laban, her brother, noticed how wealthy Abraham had become because Eliezer brings 10 camels. He brings jewelry. He brings a nose ring, puts it on her, all this wonderful stuff that we do today. And then in verse 61, she accepts the proposal, tells her mom and dad, I'm ready to go right now, because Eliezer said, I don't want to wait 10 days. God has blessed me with this project, this mission. I want to get back and tell Abraham, my master, because he's really old and he might die at any minute. Verse 61, then Rebekah rose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now Isaac, verse 62, had come from going to Beer Lahairoi, for he was living in the Negev, which is, that's where Ishmael and Hagar were. Remember this name, the God who sees, the God who hears. She's out there in the desert. She's about to die, and God hears her pleas and intervenes. Well, that's where Isaac's been living for a while. Verse 63, and Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. And she said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, he's my master. Eleazar is thinking, mission accomplished. I'm back, and there's Isaac. Then she took her veil when she said, that's the guy you're going to be married to. That's the guy you're betrothed to. She covered up her face, implying that she didn't travel 500 miles with a covered up face, a veil on. When she was ready to meet her betrothed, she covered up as a sign of modesty. And the servant, verse 66, told Isaac all the things that he had done. Probably for the third time, he's rehearsed all these words. Man, this is how God worked. It's an amazing thing. She's the one. Verse 67, then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. Now, this tent has been vacant for 3 years. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. He's 40 years old. Not to get too far ahead of the story, we'll talk about this in coming weeks, I hope. But Rebekah also is barren for a long time. So just as Abraham and Sarah were tested for years and years and years, that strengthened their faith, Isaac and Rebekah are also tested. And then he finally, as he's interceding for her, God answers, and she becomes pregnant with twins. But we'll leave that for another time. So, what is this? It's not a prescription on how to find a wife for your son. It's not a prescription on how to find a husband for your daughter. What it is a description on what had to happen for Abraham's covenant relationship with God to be continued. Abraham dies in the very next chapter, and now we're going to see that the focus shifts to Isaac and Rebekah then Jacob, then Joseph, and the Abrahamic covenant is fulfilled ultimately in Jesus Christ. The land portion is still in dispute. It will be settled in some point in the future when Jesus comes back. So Isaac is comforted. He loves his wife. He takes her into the tent, consummates the marriage. It's basically, in those days, takes a commitment between two people. It takes a betrothal, a promise, and then it takes a consummation, and there's no $100 marriage license or anything like that. They took care of business. But what happened is they took care of the important stuff way before the wedding night. What am I talking about? Finding out the values, the goals, the dreams, the plans for this person who is going to marry this person. Are they compatible? Are they consistent? Are they godly? Will they put this new marriage in a position where God can bless them? And that's what this story is about. This is a continuing narrative regarding the Abrahamic covenant. You'll see that in chapter 25, we have the death of Abraham. Ishmael and Isaac get together for the funeral. And then verse 12 to verse 18 is basically a synopsis of Ishmael's life, and then we forget him. Why? Because Scripture is selecting the son of promise, Isaac. So in chapter 25, verses 12 to 18, we get to see the descendants of Ishmael, where they went, how they were 12 princes, 12 tribes. They were blessed by God. Ishmael lived 137 years and dropped dead. And then that's it. Now we're going to focus more and more on Isaac and his descendants. So this is a narrative of selection and the continuation of the Abrahamic covenant. Now, let me share with you a true story, and it'll illustrate, I hope, the next point. This is a story about a man named Sam. There's a family of 3 from Southern California, went up to Oregon on a camping trip, and they were hiking along in the woods and some waterfalls, and they came to a beautiful spot, and they found on a big rock a Bible. Nobody around. And they looked for a name in there. All they found was Sam. But they could tell Sam had a vibrant relationship with God because he put a lot of notes in here. He underlined things. He had exclamation points. He had dates where he would make commitments and stuff. So the mom and dad and this daughter who found the Bible, the mom and dad said, man, we want a guy like Sam for our son-in-law. And so they returned to Southern California. From time to time, they would be praying with their daughter for a future spouse. And they said, Lord, send us a Sam. Well, one day, their daughter had gone off to college, and she found a boyfriend, and his name was Sam. Thank you, Jenny. What parents would not smile when they found that their daughter was dating a man named Sam in college? And then one weekend, Sam offered to help them move across town. And as he was helping them move, he's picking up boxes, and a book falls out of the box. What is it? It's Sam's Bible. Thank you, Jenny. He picks this up, said, where did you find this? This is my Bible. So not only did God send a Sam to this family, he sent the Sam. And they got married and lived happily ever after, at least so far. They're still alive. A lot of people say, wow, that's exactly what God does for our people today. Commit to have a godly spouse, pray like crazy, even be specific. I want a man named Sam, and God will direct the daughter to the right guy or direct the son to the right girl. The trouble is, that is not prescribed in the Bible anywhere. We have to learn to distinguish between commandments and descriptions. Nowhere are we told the process or even the promise that God will provide for us a godly spouse. You know whose responsibility that is? It's the single person looking for a spouse. And I would say this, not only should you be really careful who you're looking for, you should be really working hard on becoming the right person instead of finding the right person. You know the difference, right? You should be developing godly qualities in yourself so that when you come across a godly potential spouse, you will be what they need and what they've been looking for as well. Here's another interpretive thing. If this idea is true that God has one person in mind for a single person looking for a spouse, the problem becomes, what if you don't find them, or we're not, maybe they are already prematurely married to someone else? Then God's moral will kicks in, right? So if we say there's only one person in the world right for me, and that one person already found someone else and got married, God's moral standard prohibits them from getting divorced to marry me. So that means no matter what I do the rest of my life, if I've missed that one person, I can never be in the will of God. Right? No matter what I do, because what she already did, now I can never have God's perfect will for my life if God had one person in mind and she messed up and settled for second best instead of me. Right? If you miss the right person to marry someone else, it's not just if she gets married to somebody else and she was supposed to marry me. Now what if I think person B is the one for me, and I propose and she says yes, and then down the road I figure, oh shoot, person A was supposed to be my perfect spouse. And I'm not getting along with person B very well anyway. I missed God's will, divorce her and go marry person A. That's sinful, that's immoral, that's not God's will, right? So nowhere in Scripture, here's the other problem. We're never told how to find that one perfect person. A lot of people point to Genesis chapter 24. Doesn't work. There are some principles in the Bible on selecting a mate. Never are we told there's only one for us that qualifies. There's thousands and thousands. Be the right person, and certainly submit your choice to God's sovereignty. He can close the door if I'm about to make a blunder. But the fact is, God gives us freedom to choose a mate or to not choose a mate. But once we choose a mate and we get married, now we are responsible to carry out his moral will. Be married, be godly, be fruitful, multiply, all those things. You are under no obligation, young person. You're under no obligation to get married. But once you do, you are obligated by God's word, make the best of it and stay together. What God has joined together, let no one put asunder. Let no one separate. What's the deal? I said Abraham was not racist. He's looking for the best possible candidate for his daughter-in-law. And God supernaturally directed Eliezer. I'm not disputing that at all. I'm just saying it's not normative for us. If it were, we would have instructions on how to do that like Eliezer did. Now, if you want to walk around with 10 camels and ask a whole bunch of people to water them, go for it. I'm suggesting you be a godly man or you be a godly woman, and you look for a godly man or a godly woman. Not one that just wears a necklace and says, I love Jesus. One who is not only knows Jesus, but is growing in the Lord. There's evidence in their life. This person wants to follow God's standard, and I want to be part of it. So how do Christians and non-Christians kind of determine what the values are? In fact, even differing Christians. A lot of people say, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian, but, what does that mean to them? And what does that mean to you? For example, some questions to ask, what are your goals and what do you want to do for a career? And I want to stay home and raise a family. And the husband says, well, plenty of time for that. I want you to pursue a career and make some money. How are you going to reconcile that? Ask those questions first before you're surprised later. Moral standards. I want to live together, try this out like a pair of shoes. And the other person said, no, I can't do that. You need to ask those questions. Commitments, values. Here's one about childbearing. The one spouse might say, I want to have a family. The other one says, no, I don't want to have a family. I just love you, and let's just have a good time. Here's another one. If you decide to have children, or if you don't decide to have children and they come anyway, how are you going to raise them? We're not looking for people that look like us. We're looking for spouses who share our values, or else you're going to be miserable. Do yourself a favor, young person. If you're not going to be willing to die for your wife, or you're not going to be willing to honor and respect your husband, don't get married. Save yourself a lot of trouble. You're not commanded to get married, but once you get married, God's moral will kicks in. And there's another whole standard there. So ask these kind of questions. Why insist on a mate from Abraham's family? Well, he wanted somebody who believed in monotheism. The Canaanites were idolaters. They were polytheists. They were all over the map, spiritually speaking. Eliezer, I want you to go find a woman who believes in one God, and not just any God, Jehovah, the God of my son Isaac. I want an objective standard of right and wrong. There are absolutes. There are moral absolutes. One of the things that we should believe in and we should share with our potential spouse and with our children is that there is such a thing as right and wrong, black and white. And if it's not described in here as right or wrong, it's an area of freedom. Don't judge people on a false standard. But if the potential spouse says, well, right and wrong is kind of fluid, and it changes according to the culture, it changes. No, it doesn't. Right and wrong is spelled out right here. And not only is it spelled out for us, this objective standard of truth is universal. What do I mean? Right from day one, when Cain slew Abel, murder was wrong. In all cultures, at all times, in all places, murder is always evil. Right? That's an example. Stealing, adultery, the list of the 10 Commandments, universal right and wrong. So if you're interested in a young person to maybe potentially marry, you got to nail this down. Do you believe in right and wrong? And is it universal? And where do we find the right and wrong? Do we find it in Jehovah's book? Or do we find it in culture that is always transitory? God is our source of rights. We want our family members to agree to this basic value, do we not? My right to life, my right to liberty, My right to freedom is not given to me by some piece of paper we call the Constitution. My rights to life and self-defense and the pursuit of happiness is given to me by God. My Constitution might recognize those rights and put them in writing, but I don't get them from the government. I don't get them from man. So I want a spouse that agrees with me, hey, basic human values and rights are granted by a loving heavenly Father. Here's nothing. I want my spouse to agree we didn't evolve from an amoeba. We are made in the image of God, all of us. No matter what ethnic group, no matter what tribe or kindred, no matter what nationality, no matter what gender. By the way, that's another thing we want to agree on. There's only 2 of those genders. We want to know we are created in the image of God. Therefore, every single human being you ever meet has infinite value. I put up there number 5, race is of no significance. What I mean by that is there's one race, the human race. There's lots of variation. God is creative, and he's made a lot of us, so we look a lot different. That's okay. We are humans. We are in his image. And this seeking out for a spouse has nothing to do with physical characteristics. It has everything to do with spiritual values. A divine order exists in distinctives. Number 6, God is so far superior to man. We're made in his image, but we will never be God. God is God, man is man. And oh, by the way, man is fallen. God is separate from his nature. I don't want a spouse that believes in pantheism. God is in all things. No, he's not. God made all things. He's separate from all things. Man and woman are separate and distinct. They're made for each other. We need to respond to each other. We need to respect each other as who we were made to be in God's image. We are not just another animal. We are humans. Now, I don't mean to offend anybody here, but I've done it before. I understand people who love animals, and I certainly understand to some degree rights of animals in the sense that, being cruel to them is sinful. But animals do not have the same rights as man, right? There's a universal distinctive between humans made in God's image and animals put here for us to enjoy or barbecue. Just Memorial Day weekend stuff, sorry. Man is not basically good. Man is sinful. Everyone in this room, sinful. Hopefully you're redeemed. Christ paid for your sins on the cross. I can promise you that. If you've received that payment by faith, you are redeemed, but you're sinful. Until you see Jesus face to face, you're going to always be sinful. But the difference between us and unregenerate folks is they can't help it. They are sinners. We are saints who sometimes sin, right? They are sinners who have no hope of salvation other than coming to faith through Jesus Christ. It's the only way. So man is not basically good. I know that goes contrary to a lot of education today. Man is good and we're getting better. No, man is bad and we're getting worse. But there's an answer in Jesus Christ. He paid for our sins. Man needs God-based rules to control our natural inclinations. If it's just survival of the fittest and might makes right, what hope is there for any of us? So God has given us a moral standard to control our passions, to control our wrath and bigotry and racism and hatred, to become, he's given us his Spirit and his word to help us conform to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ. And until we do that, we have not arrived. Keep pressing forward, Paul said, to that upward calling of the relationship with Jesus Christ. The chief of sinners, he said of himself. And I have not yet arrived, but I keep pressing forward. That's all of us in here. I hope if you're a Christian, press forward. You haven't arrived yet. But look for your children to look for spouses that will help them in that progress forward towards Christ instead of hinder them and drag them down. I got to move on. Humans have free will. I don't know. Does anybody dispute that? I guess there are some philosophers who would. But it looks to me like humans have free will. And lots of times, they're making bozo choices, right? Humans have free will, therefore, individuals are responsible for their behavior. You know, some of these folks who, God help us, they take a gun and they go in and shoot innocent children in a school or in people in a church or in a theater or a shopping center. And then the authorities want to hold responsible Smith & Wesson. No, hold responsible the person that pulled the trigger. And that's not just for gun violence. People smoke themselves into horrible health. And then they want to sue the cigarette companies or the cigar manufacturers or let's hold foreign nations responsible for the drugs that my kids are taking. No, hold the individuals responsible that are doing the sin. Humans have free will. I want, my spouse, I want anybody that will listen to me to agree. Individuals are responsible for their own behavior. Now, some have struggles, and some have diseases, and some have this, and some have that. They have addictions and all that stuff. Christian compassion should reach out to them and try to help. But let's not blame mom and dad. Let's not blame society. Let's not blame cultures. Hold responsible the person who's doing the sin. That's the starting place. Then we can help them and provide real progress in Christ. There are some Christians who say, well, God has elected some people to salvation and some people to damnation. And when I talk to them in the counseling office, I don't invite them to Christ because I'm not sure they're one of the elect. That's right out of the pit. I had a textbook like that at my Bible college. The guy said, I don't invite people to Christ because I don't know if they're one of the elect. It seems like to me, you get out of the counseling office and go drive a truck. Good things can happen when you drive a truck, by the way. I just get out of the counseling office because it seems to me if you're going to provide real help, that's the starting place. You're a sinner. Receive Christ as your Savior. He'll forgive it. He'll wipe it clean. He'll empower you to make progress. When you receive Christ as your Savior, you're elect. You got a different future, a different eternal destination because you're in Christ. Well, let me close with this really quick. The Bible doesn't tell us how to find that one particular person, but if you'll turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I'm just going to share some principles with you about what the Apostle Paul said about marriage, finding a spouse. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. beginning in verse 25. Well, verse 20. Let each man remain in that condition in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? That means when you first came to Christ as your Savior. Some people would say, well, leave your unbelieving spouse and just pursue Christ. They're going to drag you down. Well, Paul doesn't say that. Were you called while a slave? Do not worry about it, but if you are able also to become free, rather do that, for he was called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Now, we're talking here about freedom in verse 21, not free from your unbelieving spouse, free from your master-slave relationship. Verse 22, for he who was called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who was called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each man remain with God in that condition in which he was called. Now concerning virgins, I have no command of the Lord. So you're fill in there, verse 25, no command of the Lord, but I give an opinion as one by God's mercy, I am trustworthy. There's no command here. Unmarried people have to get married. In fact, I would even, again, I don't mean to offend, but I don't even counsel people, hey, my girlfriend's pregnant, what should I do? I don't say, well, run right out and get married and everything's fine. No, that could be complicating one sin with another sin. You got to work through that, and the marriage license does not fix an unplanned premarital pregnancy. That make sense? Anyway, I better move on because you guys are getting ready to throw rocks. Verse 26, I think then that this is good in view of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. He's going to explain why, even if that's single, you take on a wife, you got another whole bunch of responsibilities. Verse 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you should marry, you have not sinned. So that's the next fill in there. He's not condemning people if they do get married. Yeah, go for it. But what does he say here? Yet such will have trouble in this life, and I'm trying to spare you. Living in marriage is a challenge. I say that as someone who next week we celebrate 47 years, right? You can ask Julie on the way out. It has not been easy. But God has blessed us, right? So he's just trying to say, if you're going to get married, it's going to be a bunch of responsibilities coming and some stresses and some tensions. Verse 29, but this I say, brethren, the time has been shortened, so that from now on those who have wives should be as though they had none, and those who weep as those they did not weep, and those who rejoice as those they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they... So life is going to accelerate, and things are going to get complicated as the end approaches. And taking on a family, it's an incredible blessing, but it's a responsibility. So he's saying, think, look before you leap. If you decide to get married, cool. But you don't have to. Be smart. Verse 31, those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it, for the form of this world is passing away. Verse 32, I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Single people, or men or women, they don't have to ask their spouse, what do you think about this, honey? If they want to serve the Lord in some capacity, they just go for it. If you come home someday and say, honey, I've heard from the Lord and we're going to Angola as a missionary, you better talk it over. But if you're single, buy a ticket, right? Go. But once you take on the marriage responsibility, Isaac, when he became the husband of Rebekah and the father to those twin boys. Whole different story than growing up 40 years in your mom's basement. Verse 34, and his interests are divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and spirit. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. In this sense, this worldliness, the husband pleases the wife. The wife pleases the husband. You didn't have to worry about that when you were single, but now it's your responsibility. God's moral will, you consider that other person. I say this for your own benefit, not to put a restraint upon you, but to promote what is seemly and to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. Verse 36, but if any man thinks that he is acting unbecomingly toward his virgin daughter, if she be full of age, and it must be so, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let her marry. Not marry him, the father, marry. We don't prohibit marriage. Just, we want you to enter it with your eyes wide open. Think this through. Verse 37, but he who stands firm in his heart, being under no constraint, but has authority over his own will, and has decided this in his own heart, to keep his own virgin daughter, he will do well. So, honey, I don't want you to get married. Stay home. I'll take care of you. 38, so then both he who gives his daughter in marriage does well, and he who does not give her in marriage will do better. You couldn't say that if God had in mind a particular person for you to marry. Because the rest of your life, you'll be looking for her, worried that if I don't find her or him, I'm out of God's will. God never says that. God says you can get married or not get married. I don't care. But if you get married, here's some rules, and here's some things to think about. One of them is not scratching your head and saying, how do I find this woman that's out of 7 billion people in the world, this is the one person for me? One last thing, verse 39. A wife is bound as long as her husband lives, but if her husband is dead, she's free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. That's the one of the very few restrictions. It's okay, go get married, but do it with someone in the Lord. That's what Abraham is concerned about. It's not that I don't want anybody from these groups here in Canaan, they're cursed by God, I want somebody else. No, I want somebody over there who believes like we do. The marriage will go a lot better if we find somebody who has our values. And so you're free to get married only in the Lord. Christian lady, Christian gentleman, don't marry an unbeliever. Don't be unequally yoked. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, I believe it is. Don't be unequally yoked, because one's going to want to go this way, one's going to want to go that way, and you'll be miserable. If you're a believer, look for a believer with similar values, goals, dreams. Do you want kids? You don't want kids? If we have kids, how are we going to raise them? What are our values? What do we want to pass on to our next generation? This is a big deal. And so here in Genesis chapter 24, after he got his son married off, Abraham dropped dead. It's like, okay, my son's got a wife and a godly woman, and I'm checking out. 140 years is long enough. And he died. And now the narrative is picked up for Isaac. And then we'll see how that works out in the coming chapters. So let's close with a song.